Vai ter, tipo, o exercício prático.
All right, Joao, you should be good to go whenever you are ready now.
Okay, so I'll share my screen. Let's see, that's
I have to...
two. I need to switch to this one. Can you see the slides?
Yep, yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so getting started here. Morning, good afternoon, folks. Thank you for coming. My name is João Vitor. I'm an assistant professor here at the ED department at Duke. And I'm gonna talk and I give a brief introduction on data models and maybe get to some SQL or SQL, depends who you talk to, they're gonna say this in different ways. So the reason to bring this up, and I mean, it's quite a technical topic. It's not something that is really applied or, like from a paper or something. It's because I'm looking into more how to harmonize data collection and how to propose these data models. And maybe some of you have the chance of running into this in the past. So for instance, if you are working in an NIH grant and you need to submit and share your data, you're gonna need to abide to some of the requirements that the repository has. So for instance, Madeline is working on the data sharing for a grant on the NIMH, the Mental Health Institute. And then they require you to use their data model, their data structures to share your study. So maybe this helps as well understand how the logic is. So first of all, a data model is an infrastructure. It's not a documentation. So it's not the same as a data dictionary. I'm going to show the discrepancy later. So you start by collecting your data, like either from an EHR, from a survey, from a registry, from a census, from a population, from the climate, or whatever source. You standardize them into entities, keys, units, and terminology. And then entity here, you can think about what's your unit of analysis. Is it at the patient level? Is it at the encounter level, hospitalization level, or is it at the municipality, aggregated level, region, etc.? Then you analyze, and then you wanted this to be reusable, right? So a data model helps you standardize all of this into clear definitions for your data, clear interoperability between different studies, and maybe eventually different research questions, and then allows you to reuse the same query all over and over again without needing to create new ones. So the thing here, you're talking about the theory on how data should be organized for your specific topic, but also on how it should be living within your database. So not the actual data points, but the structure, how you organize your data. So then here comes the differences between the data dictionary and the data model. So the dictionary is going to usually be about one specific study. It's going to define what each variable means. So like age in years, it's going to be collected as an integer. So no decimal points here. You can have values between 0 and 120. This is going to be collected in years. And then maybe if you have missing data, you're going to enter 999 as the value there. So you have labels, types, formats, etc. And this is usually, at least on our reality, seems it's mostly driven study by study and case by case. Whereas when you talk about a data model, we really talk about how the entities connect. So by entity, you are talking about semantics. You're talking about the meaning of the data that you're collecting. So for instance, a person or a patient can have an encounter. An encounter can have a diagnosis. And the facility that this was performed, the hospital this was performed, needs to be then related to the same encounter. So in that sense, you start abstracting and going beyond the single entry for the person on your spreadsheet, the single entry on your database. You talk about how granular your data is, how often it's updated, what are the limitations. And then if you really want to summarize this into a single phrase, is that the dictionary is going to describe one file, one spreadsheet, for instance, one Excel file, one data collection from a study, whereas let me put this here. Whereas the model is going to describe the system behind the many files. And again, you can stop me as if you have questions as I go. That's totally fine. A more practical example for a data dictionary is when you have a study in REDCap or in any other data collection form, and you have this PDF, for instance, with the definitions of the variables. And this is an example from the trauma registry at KCMC. Many of you might be familiar with this data set. And then you have all the specifications. But then when you talk about a data model, you actually go deeper, and you cannot have this in a single file, in a single dictionary anymore, because there are different relations between your data. So imagine you have, you're not only conducting your study at KCMC, but you're looking at the electronic health records. Usually, an electronic health records would have this sort of configuration, because the relationships between the domains are multiple. So if you have a data set that only describes the patients, so we have the patient 1, patient 2, their date of birth, birthplace, then these same persons, the same patients can have multiple encounters. So if you think about a study that you're going to longitudinally evaluate these patients and look if they're going to be readmitted in the future, you could have many entries for the same patient because they come to the hospital multiple times. And this is a way for you to account that, in that you have a data set for patients, a data set for encounters, and then you can have multiple encounters per patient. That's why we say that this is a 1-to-1 or many. So one patient can have one encounter, or they can have many encounters. There's no limitation in that. At the same time, for each encounter, which is each visit to the hospital, you can have multiple procedures, multiple medications that were given to these patients. So the same encounter, so like 1, 2, 3, you can have, an X-ray, you can have, I don't know, a CT scan, you can have many other procedures for a surgery, whatnot, for the same patients. And you can have multiple medications given to the same encounter or the same patient. So that's why you really start to look at this multi-dimensional relationship that it's not really captured by the spreadsheet. You can summarize, of course, you can summarize this into a single row, like in a spreadsheet if you want. For instance, you can ask questions like, what was the first medication given to this patient on their first encounter in the health center? Then you're going to need to filter this table to get only the first medication. You're going to filter this table to get only the first procedure. You're going to filter this table to get only the first encounter. And then in that way, you're going to have a single row, a single line of data for this patient that is only for that first, that we can also say the index encounter. But this structure essentially allows you to go much further than that. You can search for patients with multiple visits. You can search for patients with multiple procedures at the same time, multiple medications. You can search for conditions that are more refined, inclusion criteria that are more refined than just having a single flat data collection. Okay. So if you really go about and think about the data models, there are many out there. for different purposes. But essentially, you got to think about it. A good model is going to separate what is conceptual, logical, and physical decisions. And conception is what exists in your system: people, places, encounters, exposures, outcomes. In terms of logic, you're going to think about, okay, how my data relates. So one person or one patient can have multiple encounters. One exposure or one outcome has to be related to a place where it was diagnosed or where it happened. It has to be related to time. And then how it's stored, right? Then it's more on the technical side on what are the coding that you're going to use, what are the databases, how accessible it is, etc. Then we get into the sense of relational data sets. Has anyone worked with relational data sets before in their analysis or something similar? Okay, so bear with me and ask questions as you go. But this is different than just merging columns. Merging data sets, merging things. You really need to think about what is the identifier for each column, each data. So in the example that I was giving to you guys, you have the person information, the encounter information, and diagnosis information, but they are different identifiers that are going to connect the patients across them. So a patient is going to have a person ID. This person ID can be then tied to the person ID, which is in the encounter database. But if you want to look at the diagnosis, you don't have the person ID. You only have the encounter ID, which is this one. So knowing how to connect these different tables is really going to be important on your data model. Maybe to give a more practical example, when you work with the Brazilian data, the public health data from SUS, some systems are only going to have information at the municipality level. So every line in your data set, maybe for, I don't know, snake bite cases, the number of snake bite cases is only going to be for the municipality. So you take Manaus, for instance, you're going to have 10 cases in September 2025. I don't know. But then if you look at your hospitalization data, the hospitalization data, it's on the patient level. So we're going to have one row per patient, per month, per day, per municipality. So this difference really doesn't allow you to directly merge the two data sets. And then you need to know what are the keys that you can use to then merge them. So you probably would need to aggregate the hospitalization by municipality as well, and then you'll be able to merge them. This is the same general concept. You need to know how to merge them and how to organize them. And then, importantly, this is not the same as just linking data from the same patient in different data sets. So the closest example that we have running at Gemini would probably be the work that we do with the PRACT study. So we collected data that is related to the PRACT study in 3 different data sets, in actual 3 different REDCap forms. So the first one is called the trauma registry. The second one is the PRACT trial data. And the third one is the interventions data. This was done first because we need to think about eligibility. So all patients that have injuries are then collected on the trauma registry. But then only a few of them that have alcohol-related, that reported consuming alcohol before that injury are then eligible for the trial. Then those that are eligible come to the trial data. We screen them if they actually are positive, if they agree to participate, and then only the ones that are randomized show on the interventions data. So you could think that these are like subsets of each cohort of patients, but in the end, they are capturing the same level of information. It's the same, one encounter, one patient. So you're really not thinking about this data model. You're thinking about 3 different snapshots of different subgroups, right? So it's not the same as this because you have a variable that is called PRACT ID that essentially describes if the patient was enrolled, what is their ID, and then you can just connect all of these patients. If you're going to think about a data model, you can actually think about a patient story, a patient process through the health system. So you can really ask questions or translate this into affirmations that, using the different tables that the different elements of the data model, you can actually describe a patient came to facility F019 at this date. It was diagnosed with asthma. This patient was born in 1984 in the municipality code, blah, blah, blah. So you can really describe what happens to the patient because of this. And you can create many different snapshots because of how you have organized this data. And this becomes reproducible, right? So it's the linked path across the data that is what really matters here. Okay, I want to stop here before I move on and see if there are any questions. Let me look at the chat if there's anything.
How do you know, João, when you should use the data model or the data dictionary when we need to start the data model and the dictionary is not enough?
You can think about creating a data model or using a data model when you're thinking about this, the reproducibility of your study. So maybe going beyond a single study at Gemini versus a study that is done across different sites in Tanzania, that is done in a consortium.
Bigger sample size, maybe like a trial, then you should do like for a model.
So maybe not necessarily for a trial, but if you're thinking about connecting your trial data to some other trial data, right? And then you don't need to propose a new data model every time. That's what I want to talk about. There already exist common data models that you can use for different purposes. And you can leverage those, right?
Thinking about studies that connect, for example, environmental variables such as the temperature outside and people's physical activity. So you kind of have to have something to connect, like temperature, day, and person and their activity.
Yeah.
So for me, it seems that it's also useful to unite different perspectives into one big.
Nice. That's a good abstraction. Yeah. Thinking about how you transform different units, as you said, the dates, the geographical collection of temperature, etc., and then organize them. Yes. Okay. So common data models, they are good because they help you reuse your data. They help you to compare your data to other studies. They ensure quality because then you can always rely that an issue, maybe a missing data, is not happening by human error. It's happening because it actually wasn't collected. Allows you to collaborate across different units. Allows you to actually govern the version of the data model as well. So this can also play into the data governance of your field and your data, and then extend to new sources. That's really, really important. Then if you want to create something new, or if you want to leverage something new, how this is created, right? So usually this, not usually, but this needs to be a multidisciplinary approach. So we're going to gather folks that are from the domain. So let's say we're trying to do this now for snakebite. So what we're going to do is going to gather experts in snakebite care and you know, physicians, nurses, etc. And I'm going to ask them, okay, how often should we measure the patient coagulation levels? What do we need to know about the species of snake that bit the patient, right? So we are going to start having this discussion on what conceptually really informs care. What would you need to know to evaluate the care that was given to a patient? Then we talk to the data team that is going to say, well, but in my hospital, we really don't really collect that information right now. So if we want to build this for the future, we need to start collecting new patient data now, which is something we're already doing as well. And then you're going to talk to your analytical team and say, okay, in order for me to build machine learning models, in order for me to give you the best, a good fit for the model, I need the data to look like so. And then in this conversation, you're going to define what are the elements, what are the scales, the granularity, the shape for your data collection. And as I was telling folks here, Marcela and Leticia, that you not necessarily need to always create your own data model. You can leverage what people have created before. And I'll give you examples how this looks like. So these are a list of famous common data models, I want to say, and they actually focus on different challenges and try to solve different problems. So this first one is, which we call FHIR. It's used in electronic health record systems to exchange health information. So it's really good because these models, this organization can talk to, allow you to have messages for clinicians. You know, you can have a patient-facing interface and that kind of stuff. It's really good for clinical interoperability. But then it's really good for collecting, organizing, and having an app that the clinician can interact with, but it is not really good for research. So folks from the OMOP, which I forget what this means, I think it's observatory, something. It's focused on observational data, where they wanted to really harmonize and create a multi-database analytics. So in a way that if we take data from a hospital in Canada and a hospital in Durham, we will be able to then compare what was the outcome for these patients in observational studies, in a cross-sectional study using a big sample, for instance. We have the PCORNet model, which is pretty famous here in the US as well, because PCORNet is a national network of clinical trials, which is focused on patient-centered outcomes. It is focused for clinical research in a way that if I want to run a clinical trial in Durham here at Duke, and I don't have enough patients because I don't have, you know, patients with the condition I want to study don't really come to Durham. What I can do is that I can enroll patients in New York, I can enroll patients in California, I can enroll patients in whatever place that uses PCORNet, and then I can pull the data from them with much without needing much change in the process. So I only need people there to enroll my patients, and this data is going to be collected by standard because of their clinical care. So this allows for multi-center clinical trials, which is really, really cool. And then we have the DHIS2, which is used, it's a popular platform for collecting epidemiological information. It's an open source tool that allows for low and middle income countries, for instance, to establish their surveillance for specific diseases, for treatment, and etc., which is really relevant as well, and then can be leveraged across different countries, and then can use to report to WHO and many other things. Why do we need these models? Why do we need to have maybe different models, etc.? It's because we can then unify the process. I don't even need to show this one. I'll show just the next slide. The really cool thing about having a common data model is that it doesn't really matter where the data comes from. If it's coming from electronic health records from a given hospital, if it's coming from claims from health insurance company, if it's coming from a data registry that was established in a small facility in the countryside of US or whatever, you can just transform your data to match what the common data model tells you to do. And then with the same query, you can get data from the whole country or the whole system, which is really, really powerful. So in that way, you increase your sample size, you increase your power, you increase your capability to make these multi-center studies, which are then allow you to get more reliable evidence for your studies. So this is where you would essentially want to get. You want to get to a decentralized model that allows you to then leverage the data. In the question that Leticia shared and the example I shared before, so NIH has established the data sharing platform, policy. So each institute that funds research in the US has different requirements. For some of them, you have a repository that's called the, I think it's National Data Archive. It's NDA, the acronym, if I'm correct, or maybe it's like NIMH Data Archive or something. That's what it's called, NDA. So all studies that are funded to do behavioral health interventions, substance abuse interventions, from these different institutes need to share data to this platform. So if I collect audit or drink or PHQ-9 from folks in Tanzania, and another study is collecting audit, PHQ-9, and drink from folks from, I don't know, Lithuania, and these studies are funded by the NIH, the data from all of these studies are then deposited in the same repository, and they are harmonized. So meaning that if for some reason I used a different questionnaire for audit, maybe I changed the order of some questions, maybe the audit 1, it's the same as audit 5 in another study. When you submit the data to NDA, all of this is harmonized. So then I can eventually do these studies where I'm going to compare the mental health status on PHQ-9 answers from Tanzania, Lithuania, US, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why it's really, really powerful.
But should the data dictionary be the same or not necessarily?
When you have the data model, it needs to be the same. So that every time that you're going to harmonize your data to match a data model, you might lose some information. So an example is maybe in your study, you collected age as a categorical variable, right? You don't have 1, 2, 3, you have elderly, etc. But then in Brazil, the definition of elderly might be different than in Tanzania. Yes. So this is a challenge, and sometimes there's not really a way to fix. You just need to accept some of these limitations. But as soon as you start thinking about joining these consortiums, you can also think about how can I then improve my data collection so that I already collect data in the same way as the consortium does. So then you can join, you can leverage and do it too. And this would be like a simple snapshot of what the data model looks like. This is OMOP as well. Simple. Each one of these, you could describe them as a data dictionary. Each one of these is going to have a set of variables related to their topic. So like person, it's going to probably have maybe the date of birth, city of birth, age when they arrived, sex, gender, so demographic information. But then when you go to something like cost, this is going to be related to the cost for the procedures or the medications that the patient went through when they were there, they visited. So the information here is not about the patient, it's about the stay. It's about the process itself. If you go to something like, let's see, drug, this is going to be a table, a data dictionary that standardizes what the drugs are. So you're not going to collect ibuprofen You're not going to collect penicillin. You're going to collect a number, a barcode, that then is going to translate exactly to ibuprofen 5 times a day, 200 milligrams oral. And then penicillin is going to be, intramuscular, 5 mLs, whatever. So it's going to be really standardized. So the units are different. So you don't need to worry that you're going to lose details when you collecting the data, because you have all of this accessory information as well, so on and so forth. When you go into actually thinking about this to a global health scenario and thinking about some of the studies that we do at Gemini, the challenge is usually the format and the grain, or the resolution, the grain, I think it's a good word. We usually have the issue that data and health data, it's sensitive, of course, and whatever is made public, it's usually aggregated to some extent. Especially those epidemiological surveys, any information that could be sensitive, that could be, put the population in danger somehow because of that. So in connecting these data sets and creating this data model is challenging, because you're often going to have, for a given survey that we did from one study at KCMC, for instance, you're going to have a person and then the date that the interview was done. But then if you go to the EHR and try to look up the same person, the EHR is going to be organized by admission, by event. So the patient was admitted, the patient died, or there was some notification for the case. So we're going to run into multiple entries for the same patient, because they can come to the hospital multiple times, they can get admitted multiple times, they come to the ED multiple times. So we have an event versus date and time, not only date. You also have time of arrival, time of discharge, all of those stuff. So it's really hard for you to think about and establish this on different sources. And that's why when you have a standard and common data model that can help you harmonize, organize, and then contribute to these large studies as well. Okay, stop here. Questions? We're going to look into some code, but it's not going to be too much, I promise. Okay.
How hard it is to adapt ongoing work to one of these data models?
It's going to depend, Rafael, if you have on the amount of variables you have. So it might be that from the, 300 variables you collected for your patient, maybe some of them are not going to be able to be adapted to data model. So like, if you collect things on your specific study, like was the intervention performed, yes or no, for your trial, this is not going to be on the data model, because the data model already expects that the intervention was done, right? So it doesn't, those operational variables won't have a direct adaptation that you can do. But other than that, it really becomes this process of what are the limitations of adapting to an existing data model, and can you be clear about those limitations? So are you going to break the information? You're going to lose the information that you really care about if you adapt? If that's the case, maybe that's a big stop, a big break point that doesn't allow you to go forward. Let me think of a good example. Maybe an example is you're collecting data on your patients, and then you know that this patient died after some time after randomization, but then the data model you want to use doesn't have a field that describes, did this patient die or what was their outcome. By just sharing the data, you might be running into an issue where the data from this patient represents a patient that was at risk, a patient that was maybe the intervention had some negative effect on this patient, and then this is not going to be captured on the data model. So a person then looking at the data model later, it's going to not be deceived, but it's not going to be able to tell that this patient then had a poor outcome, right? So this type of consideration comes into place, and then talking to experts and talking to the content leads, the data leads, etc. in your work, and defining what is the acceptable range you can go forward. I think that's a good way to go. Okay. Then moving on, it's going to be, I think it's 5 more slides or so, 6. So why am I talking about SQL or SQL here? Because it's the language it's the programming language that it's the most used for this type of work. It is focused on integrating with databases. It's focusing on getting data out for you to then run analysis. And it really has the same process of working with a similar process as working with Python or R for data analysis, or even SAS or Stata that have some coding, have some programming script that you can run. So the logic is similar. Once you know one, it's easier for you to adapt. But using SQL lets you filter through millions of rows. You only select what matters, and then you analyze the result. As a researcher, and thinking about the longevity of your research, you might be thinking, well, why don't I just take all of the database and then I filter whenever I want to do a study in my own computer, and that way I have a huge amount of data and I can do multiple studies, right? Why don't I go to the EHR and get all patients that came to the hospital in the last 10 years? That way I'm going to be able to do many papers. I'm going to investigate a lot of stuff, right? Of course, the first process is the ethical process, right? When you submit, when running a research, you have to have IRB approval, and you have IRB approval to do that project, right? You don't have IRB approval to get the hospital data for you. But the second thing is that we are not used to think about big data. So this is big data, right? This is to the level of Duke here. If you go to the Encounter database, every single time that a patient interacts with the health system, be it at the ED, at an outpatient, at like a remote, like a telephone call, an SMS message with the clinician, or anything, that's an encounter. So every year you have hundreds of millions of encounters. So it doesn't make sense for you to pull all the data, because your computer is gonna explode, and you're probably gonna get arrested because they're gonna think you're doing something evil with the data. So using SQL allows you to filter, pre-filter, get only what you need, and then optimize computational resources as well, in a way that eventually you can then have your analysis. You can run R, Python, Stata, SAS, even Excel if you want. You're going to be filtered with a manageable amount of data. So the logic is SQL talks to the database. You describe what you want. You build your cohort. This goes into the database engine, and then operationally speaking, doesn't matter what database you have. If it's Microsoft, whatever. It doesn't matter. SQL can talk to the database, and then you can then run an analysis with your analysis codes. I don't think I need to talk. I already said this. The structure. Yep, I think so. And then let me show you practical examples on how this is similar to what you're maybe already seen in R or Python or whatever. So this is a query. So we are asking the questions, which encounters were ED visits in 2025? So like, how many encounters did I have in 2025? And I'm using code that is focused on the OMOP data model. So if you want to test that out, you can copy this code and run it on OMOP, and you're going to get the data that you need. So in SQL, you would start by selecting the variables that you want. So I only want these 3 variables from the data table that talks about the visits. I'm going to filter, which is where the type of visit is 9203, because that's how they code ED encounters. And then I want to filter where the visit starts in January 2025 and then ends before January 2026. So if you think about the logic, it's, you know, your columns, you select them from this database, and then you filter them by the type of encounter and when this encounter happened. So pretty standard. The difference is that this is inverted from what you usually do in Python or R, where you start with your database. Here, this is R and in tidyverse. You start your database, you filter the database, then you select your columns. So the only thing that changes is the order of the process, because SQL is optimized for you to pull the least amount of data every time. So in R, you are essentially getting the whole database, you are filtering, and then you're selecting your columns. If you do that in SQL, it would take 10 times longer for you to then get data out of the database, because you are talking about big data here. Similarly, if you go into a bit a more in-depth question is, okay, from these ED visits, how many of them were for adults? The challenge now becomes that your data for age is not on your encounter, because age is related to the patient, it's a person, so then it's going to be a different data table. So the same process you do in R here in the right, where you do like this inner join or left join to get data from one data set into another data set based on the keys. You're going to do the same here in SQL. You select your columns from the table that you want to look at. Then you join to the table for the person information. And here is the column that you're going to merge on, the key. And then you have all the filters you had before, with the difference that you want to have 18 years of age.
Why is there like P point visit or P is regarding to the data set?
Yes, good question. Good eye. The way in SQL you can create aliases for your table. You can rename them to make it easier. So you see how I say visit occurrence as V and then person as P. So then I can easily distinguish the variables between each table. Otherwise, if you have the variable age in table 1 and age in table 2, you're gonna get an error because they have the same name. Okay. you can do to some extent something similar in R. But you see how in this process, you select and you filter, get the least amount of data that you need at the first time. Whereas in R, in order to filter patients that are 18 years of age, you're only going to do this at the last step. And you declared everything, so it's going to take much more time. I don't think I need to show this, but I'm going to share the slides. If you want to look at the codes and see how you count, you do the same as you do in R, but that's fine. And then getting to the final maybe thought here is use SQL to create the smallest correct database that you want to use, data set, and then you use Python or R to study, to do graphs, tables, models, etc. The same process, you define, you query, you collect, and then you analyze. And you're going to choose SQL when you have very big, large data sets. The data is relational, it's governed by some institution, or it's something that's going to be queried every time. So every 10 days, you need new data coming from, every 50 days, whatever. So SQL is a good option for that. And then choose R Python, where you focus on statistics, visualization, machine learning, you want to build a report, or it's something that it's a manageable size. So like, I don't know, maybe when you think about the data set that is bigger than 1 million rows, 10 million rows, you might start already thinking about using SQL to make this process a bit faster for you in the end. Final question, do I really need to learn yet another SQL, yet another new language, programming language? The answer is not necessarily, because there are ways for you to go and try to translate the queries that you have in R to SQL. A really cool package in R, it's called dbplyr. So it's the same process of the dplyr in R, but you have the database, so DB's database. So it's really cool because you write the same code that you would do in R, and then it translates in the backend for SQL for you, and then you don't need to look at anything. But it's at the same time, it's good to know what it's doing. So if you need to fix anything. And there is also SQL Alchemy in Python that sort of do the same if you're using Pandas, which is a famous package for data analysis. And the other really cool thing is that AI LLMs are really good at translating these languages. So you can write what you want to do, even in English or whatever language, say, I want to query this database for only patients coming to the ED 10 years ago. It's going to be able to write the SQL code for you, or it can take your Python or R code and transform into SQL for you to then run. Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions.
I was thinking about the dashboard that you created for one study. Could you do that with SQL
Yes.
directly, or you have to convert to?
So you mean actually generate the dashboard, like the visual, or do you mean the data for the dashboard? Or maybe both?
Well, yeah, both. You can extract the data and then do the dashboard all in the same language.
Yes, in a sense, yes. So SQL is not good for you to generate figures. It's not good for you to generate plots, etc., because it's limited in that sense. It's more on getting data out. But then you can use Python, R, any other language to have the interface. and then pull the data and organize the data, right? You can think of the logic becomes you have this 100 million rows database, you use SQL to pull 10,000, then this 10,000 becomes a data frame in R with a read CSV, you know, like you would do it similarly in Python with the pandas, whatever. And then that is easily plottable, manageable in your dashboard. Okay. Okay, folks. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. I wanted to see, Madeline, do you have anyone signed up for next week?
I believe so. I think Marcella, are you signed up for next week? Let me pull it up really quick. Yeah, a statistical analysis plan for drink further validation is what I have on the schedule. Does that still work for you?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Can't
Just
imagine.
let me know if not.
Sounds good. So see you next week, folks.